Hello everyone, welcome to this module on writing essentials. In this series on sentence, this is lecture number 3, where we are going to discuss about the noun phrase of a simple sentence. To begin with, let's do this little activity. Look at the words given and try to identify the various parts of speech of these words. Then also try to arrange these words into a meaningful sentence. Yes, I know most of you have got it right. So the sentence that could be formed by using these words is something like this. The black cat ran quickly across the road, but it was hit by the truck. Now let's try to analyze this sentence a bit more. Of course, it seems not to be a simple sentence, but two independent clauses rolled into one or combined by a conjunction but. Okay, now let's look at each of the clauses. So this is one sentence with two clauses. And the first clause is, the big cat ran quickly across the road. That's clause number 1. And then we have another clause, it was hit by the truck. That's clause number 2. Now let's analyze both of the clauses a little bit more. Now let's look at clause number 1. In this clause, we have a noun phrase or the subject, the black cat. Then we also have a verb or a verb phrase, ran. Then we have an adverb, quickly, and then a prepositional phrase, across the road. Let's get to the clause number 2. Here we have the subject, it, which is again a noun phrase. Though it's a pronoun, it's also part of the noun phrase. And then we have a verb phrase, was hit, which consists of two verbs, a helping verb was and a main verb, hit. Then we have a prepositional phrase consisting of by the truck. Good. So this is how we can go on analyzing sentences to understand what is making up the subject and the verb. One thing we understand from this analysis is that the subject can be just one word, like in the second clause, a pronoun it, or a group of words, like in the first clause, a black cat. Similarly, verb can be just one word, like ran in clause number 1, or a combination of a helping and a main verb, like was hit in the clause 2. So in this video, we will be learning about the basic patterns of a simple sentence and what are the elements that make up a simple sentence. Then, of course, the subject and the object. And we'll be mostly looking into the noun phrase and its components which make up the subject. So things like determiners, modifiers, and quantifiers which go along with the noun to form the noun phrase. Let's move on. Now let's try to understand the basic patterns of a simple sentence. One of the basic pattern of simple sentence is something like this. I was reading a newspaper. So you have a subject I, then a verb or a verb phrase was reading, and an object, a newspaper. Or another pattern of a simple sentence can be this. The weather is very good. Here we have a subject, then a verb, and we don't have an object, but we have a complement. A complement is a group of words which actually describes the subject, which completes the sentence. So you don't necessarily have an object here, but a phrase which describes the subject. Another pattern of a simple sentence is something like this. The flight is leaving shortly. Here we have a subject, then we have a verb, is leaving, and then we have an adverbial or an adverb shortly. So an adverbial could mean an adverb, a prepositional phrase, or even a noun phrase. One other pattern could be something like this. The aircraft left London at 3 o'clock. Here we have a subject, and then we have a verb, we have an object too, and again we can have an adverbial. So these are some basic patterns of writing a simple sentence. But when we observe all of these patterns, there are two things which are common. The first one is the subject part, which is the basic component of all simple sentences, and then the verb, which is also an important element of a sentence. So we need to understand what makes up the subject and what forms the verb section of a simple sentence. So these are some basic patterns, and we also understand that the basic elements of a simple sentence are the subject and the verb. Now let's look at those elements of a simple sentence, of the patterns that we have just observed before. One is the subject. Yes, and subject always is consisting of a noun phrase. A noun phrase can be just one noun or a pronoun or a combination of a determiner plus noun or a modifier plus noun or a quantifier plus noun. The other important element of a sentence is the verb, and which is actually what we call as the verb phrase, which consists of the verb phrase. A verb phrase can be like just one verb or one word like a main verb, or a linking verb like is, or it can be a combination of a helping verb and a main verb like must book or is leaving. And then comes the object. Now the object is always a noun phrase, because we're talking about objects, and objects always are noun phrases just like the subject. The another element that we observed in the pattern is the complement. And a complement can be an adjective phrase like very good, or a noun phrase. He is a pilot. And finally, adverbial. Now adverbials could be adverb phrases like shortly, or a prepositional phrase like at 3 o'clock, by the river, etc., or a noun phrase like next week. So what we observe from this is a noun phrase can be part of subject, an object, a complement, or even an adverbial. Right. In this video, we are going to discuss the noun phrase in detail. But before we go into observing the noun phrase in detail, let's examine these two sentences. I was reading a newspaper, and then the weather is good. Now we observe that the first sentence has an object, whereas the second sentence has a complement. Now, when does a sentence have an object, and when does it have a complement? Now, a sentence having an object depends on the verb. Similarly, a sentence having a complement also depends on the verb. So now we need to look at the verb section, because the verb is the one which determines if a sentence has one object or two objects, or even it has a complement. Okay, now let's look at those sentences where we don't find objects. Something like this. Something unfortunate happened. The man runs along the beach every morning. The man was waiting at the side of the road. In each of these sentences, you find there is a verb like happen, runs, or was waiting. And they, even irrespective of the phrase that comes after it, they convey the complete meaning. In a sense, these verbs do not require an object. For example, the sentence "the man runs" does convey enough meaning, uh, like the sentence "the man runs along the beach every morning." So these verbs like happen, run, waiting do not require an object to complete the meaning. There are some other verbs like these, like dance, arrive, sleep, die, sneeze, sit, listen, smell, stand, swim, and many more. Now these verbs which do not take an object, although there can be a phrase after it, but which does not actually mean an object, are called as intransitive verbs. So the meaning is complete, it is not in transit. So something unfortunate happened conveys enough meaning for us to understand. So such verbs which do not require objects are called as intransitive verbs. Now intransitive verbs usually express actions, that means what people are doing or what the subject is doing, and also events like things happening, what is happening, right, what's something going on. So actions and events can be expressed by intransitive verbs. But not all verbs are intransitive. Some do take an object. Some require an object to complete its sense. For example, look at these sentences. The man stole a coat. Everyone enjoyed the conference. The driver saw the young man at the side of the road. The man had no money. Now each of these sentences has a verb: stole, enjoyed, saw, had. But then when you say the man stole, it requires an object to complete the meaning of the sentence. The next question will be, what did he steal? When you say the man stole, what did he steal? So he stole a coat. Everyone enjoyed. What did they enjoy? They enjoyed a conference. So by nature, these verbs require an object to complete the meaning in the sentence. So such verbs are called as transitive verbs. That means the meaning is always in transit. It is not ended. So these verbs always require something to complete the sense of the sentence, something, the sense of them itself. So such verbs which take objects are called as transitive verbs. When you look at those sentences given, you will observe that transitive verbs can express not only actions like stole, but also feelings like enjoyed, and perception like seeing, and possession like had. So transitive verbs can do a lot of works than intransitive verbs. Intransitive verbs can only express what is happening or what are the actions done by people or subjects, but whereas transitive can do more works like actions, feelings, even describing perceptions or possessions. Sometimes some verbs can take two objects, like I'll give you this envelope, I will send him an email. If you observe, you will find that there are two objects in these sentences. I'll give you, the first object, and this envelope, the second object. So verbs like give, send, etc. can have two objects, or they can have an object and an adverbial. Okay, now when a verb has two objects, generally while writing, the first object is called as the indirect object and the second is the direct object. Now if you observe those sentences again, I'll give. Now what will you give? It's the envelope. So that's the direct object. To whom will you give? It's you. That's the indirect object. So generally while writing, we write the indirect object first and then the direct object second. The indirect object usually refers to the person receiving something, whereas the direct object refers to the thing that is given. So what is the direct object? Who is receiving is the indirect object. Now we also observe that some sentences take complements and they do not take any objects. For example, the hotel was quiet, the thief seemed depressed, the book has become a bestseller, it is getting dark. When we observe these sentences, we observe that they do not have any objects, but they have some complements, something which describes the subject. So, what causes complements? It's the linking verbs which cause complements to occur. Was, seemed, become, is. Now these are linking verbs and which cause complements. So a complement relates to the subject. It describes the subject and identifies it, like says who or is it or what it is. Now some of the most common verbs, linking verbs, which cause complements are, apart from the verbs with be, which come with be, the other are appear, become, look, prove, remain, seem, sound, stay, feel, get, grow, smell, taste, turn, make, go, lie, live, sit, stand, stay, so on. Right. So up to now we have looked into those patterns of sentences where we have objects and complements, and we have come to understand that it's the verb which determines if a sentence has an object, two objects, or only a complement. Now let's come to the subject. Now the first thing, so in a sentence the subject usually makes a link with the situation or with the previous sentence. For example, there are a series of sentences written here. I hate supermarkets. They are so crowded. They are expensive. The prices horrify me. Now, each of these is a separate sentence, and each of these sentences is linked to the previous sentence. Now, if you carefully observe, I hate supermarkets, and the next sentence is they are so crowded. What are they? They are the supermarkets. The third sentence is and they are expensive. What are expensive? What are they? Again, it's the crowded supermarkets. Expensive. What are expensive? The prices horrify me. The new information is always coming later in the sentence. So when you write a series of sentences, the subject of a next sentence is usually connected with the information in the previous sentence. But sometimes, we also have subjects which are not nouns, because we have understood that generally the subject place is taken up by the noun phrase, either noun or pronoun. But sometimes we have some words which act like a subject, and they're called as empty subjects, like there and it. Now there expresses the idea that something exists. There was a swimming pool at the end of the garden. So here we find that there is something existing. A swimming pool exists. Okay, so there conveys an idea that something exists. And generally it is used to refer forward to a phrase or a clause. It's nice to see you. So not just something exists, but what is that something? So it's nice to see you, an emotion regarding that person. Okay, now let's understand when should we use there or it. Now, because there expresses the fact that something exists or happens, we use there with a noun phrase of indefinite meaning, like a young lady. There is a young lady. So it could mean someone or something. Whereas it describes something, it identifies or describes something, saying like what it is or who it is and what it is like. So it is more definite in that sense. So it refers to something definite. Example, the young lady. When you say the young lady, something known in the situation. It can also refer forward to a clause. Now look at these following sentences to observe where we need to differ in the usage of there and it. There's a young lady at the door. That means a young lady is at the door. And when you say it's Lorraine, it means that young lady is Lorraine. So now it describes that person who is at the door. So whereas there just says that someone is there, but it says who is that? There's a wind today. That means a wind is blowing. But when we say yes, it's windy, that means the weather is windy. It's not something, but it's the weather, a definite sense. There weren't any classes. That means no classes took place. But when we say it was Saturday, that means the day was Saturday. So it is used in a definitive sense, and there is indefinite in nature. Now let's look at the noun phrases. Now a noun phrase can be a subject, an object, a complement, or an adverbial, as we have known already. It can also be the object of a preposition, even an object of a preposition. Yes. For example, let's look at some noun phrases which act in different cases. The security guards set a trap. Now this is about like the subject. The security guards is the subject. The stewardess alerted the pilot. Now here the pilot is the object. The cost of a bottle was 17 pence. Now again we have 17 pence, which is actually not an object but a complement. That day something unusual happened. Now that day is a noun phrase, but here it is acting like an adverbial. The passengers left in a hurry through fine exits. Now we have a prepositional phrase in a hurry, and where hurry is a noun phrase in that prepositional phrase, and through fire access, and fire access is a noun again, which is part of the prepositional phrase through fire access. So this is how noun phrases can occupy different places in a sentence: place of subject or object or complement or prepositional objects. Okay, now let's look a bit more carefully at the noun phrase. A noun phrase can be just one word, like gold is expensive. Planes take off from here. They landed at Berlin. She alerted the pilot. And in all of these sentences, the noun phrase consists of only one word. And it can be an uncountable noun, it can be a plural noun, it can be just a name, okay, or it can be even a pronoun. But then noun phrase can also be more than one word. If you say someone was stealing the whiskey, a lot of planes took off or take off from here, security guards set a trap. Now here we find more than one word which is actually acting like a noun phrase. Okay, now let's look at these various components of a noun phrase. Now in a noun phrase there can be nouns, and along with nouns we do have some other words like determiners or quantifiers or modifiers. Now what are these words? Now let's start with the determiners. Now determiners generally talk about which one. Okay, if a bomb, which means one bomb. Similarly, the result means that result, or this idea, which means this one. My bag, which means somebody's bag. Okay, Shireen's purse, it means it's only Shireen's purse, not somebody else. So determiners here, they talk about noun in a sense of which is it. So determiners can be many others, like they can be articles like a, an, and the. They can be demonstratives like this, that, these, and those. They can also be possessives like my, Shireen's, or yours, so on. Now, what are quantifiers? Now, quantifiers talk about quantity. These also come before the noun, just like the determiners. But they talk about how many and how much. Two people, which means two, the number is two. Half the passengers, which means half of the passengers. And it can also talk about how much, every photo, a lot of money. So quantifiers, which talk about the quantity, also come before nouns in a noun phrase. Some of the other quantifiers are like a lot of, many, much, a few, every, each, all, most, both, half, some, no, so on. Now let's look at some of the aspects of determiners and quantifiers while writing a simple sentence. A quantifier can be more than one word too. A lot of, or 250 passengers. We sometimes use both a quantifier as well as a determiner, like all that money or both the doors. So you have a quantifier all and both, and then you also have determiners like that and the alongside the nouns money and doors. We can also use a determiner after a quantifier and of plus of, each of the doors, a lot of my time, one of these magazines. Now when you observe these phrases, what we find is that uh, you have a determiner, and then you also have a quantifier, and then you have a preposition of in combination with this. Sometimes a quantifier comes after a determiner. The many rooms of the house. Those few people left the three brothers. Now here we have the quantifier many coming after the determiner the, or the quantifier few coming after the determiner those. So we can use many, few, or a number after the, these, those, or a possessive. Now a possessive form also functions as a determiner. A lot of Susan's friends, or the man's friends. There can be more than one adjective or noun modifier, like a lovely hot meal, where you find lovely and hot, both of them are adjectives, and there can be more than one adjective in a noun phrase. The modifier can be a gerund or a participle. So like cooking oil, where cooking is gerund, flying lesson is flying is a gerund, which is a noun. Cooking is a noun here. It can also be a participle, like a ticking clock, where ticking is present participle and clock is the noun. Some stolen bottles, stolen is the past participle here. So we were talking about modifiers. And what is a modifier? A modifier is nothing but an adjective which modifies a noun. It can be like an adjective or sometimes another noun acting as a modifier. So small bottles, exact time, glass bottles, and emergency landing. All of these, in all of these phrases, we have modifiers like small and exact, which are actually adjectives, and they're modifying bottles and time. In the second group of phrases, we have glass and emergency, which are actually nouns, and they are modifying the other nouns like bottles and landing. So modifiers can be adjectives or nouns which modify a certain noun in a phrase. A prepositional phrase or adverb phrase can come after the noun and modify it, like the summer of 1978. So 1978 of 1978 is a prepositional phrase, and it's modifying the noun before, that is summer. So when adjectives and nouns are used, they come before the actual noun, but when we use a prepositional phrase, it comes after the noun to modify. Now we have learned about the different types of quantifiers and modifiers. Now if you observe, each of them has a particular purpose. For example, you can talk about A to talk about only countable things, and you can talk about a few when we say about uncountable things, only uncountable things. And similarly, a little can be used to talk about only uncountable things. And then both, some can be used to talk about both countable or uncountable things. Similarly, any can be used to talk about both countable or uncountable nouns. And many is used to talk about plural countable nouns. Similarly, a load of and lots of. Now let's do an activity to understand how we actually use them. For example, imagine the context of a classroom. So you can have a teacher, countable, singular. Few pieces of chalks, countable, plural. A little discussion, uncountable. Some desks, countable, plural. Any questions? Could be countable or uncountable. Yep. And many doubts, countable. A lot of students, a lot of information. Now go on and do the other two. Uh, think of other two contexts and try to fill up the blanks using your imagination. Now let's sum up what we have learned so far. So we have learned that simple sentences can have objects depending on the verb. So depending on the verb, they can take either one object or two objects, or they can just do not take any object and just have a complement. Intransitive verbs do not take objects, whereas transitive verbs take objects. Some verbs like give and take can take two objects. So indirect objects and direct objects. So indirect objects are generally the person to whom something is given, and direct objects are generally the things which are given or taken. The noun phrases in a sentence, simple sentence, can be part of subject, object, prepositional phrase. The nouns, pronouns, articles, determiners, and modifiers make up the noun phrase. Thank you for watching this video. For any questions or queries, you can contact us on the number and the mail ID, or you can post a query on the blog given. Have a good day.